All right, y'all. I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody. Gina, I went ahead and unmuted you as well. I'll give you, there you go. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start. Shalom, everybody. For those of you who are joining on, I still see people are having trouble joining us. There you go. Folks are still having issues joining on. Let us know if there's some sort of tech issue going on. But hello, everybody. My name is Eddie Chavez Calderon. I am the campaign organizer for Uriel Aesthetic. We are so happy that you're able to join us. Happy to have all of you here today in such a great event and such a great day. Unfortunately, I know that we're all going through different things, living up to a pandemic, waking up to a new tweet, realizing that our communities are under attack. We see that different systems of oppression are rampant and continuing to grow and are strong, but our communities have to stay strong and have to stay active in our advocacy. Just as our systems of oppression are nonstop, our advocacy has to be nonstop. And now more than ever, I'm more than happy to introduce a personal mentor of mine, somebody who was able to sit down with me in the beautiful mountains of Simi Valley and really engage into having conversations on race relations, conversations on Mussar, conversations on leadership and involvement, and what does that look like, and really blowing my mind on such amazing leadership and engaging talks with my amazing friend, Ginna Green, who we are excited to have on board today. Thank you so much, Ginna, for coming on here. Ginna is a consultant who has worked with various organizations like Bend the Arc and so on. We are so happy to have you here, Ginna. You are a personal mentor of mine, somebody who is an inspiration for Jewish leadership that we crucially need right now, and somebody that I definitely look up to. So everybody, it is my pleasure to introduce Ginna Green, and again, huge shout out to the Roundtable, Jewish Roundtable, who's made this awesome webinars possible. Thank you so much for y'all's support and continuous support of our anti-racism webinars. And so with any, no more further delay, Ginna, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you, Eddie. That has to be the best introduction I've ever had, ever. And you know, before we started today, Eddie said, you know, I'd like to give you more of a personal introduction rather than reading from the bio, which most of us can do. And so it really warms my heart, and I wanted to say thank you, Eddie. I don't consider myself a mentor. I consider myself a friend-tor. I learned as much from you as you said that you've learned from me. So I appreciate that time and the relationship that we have. So thank you for bringing me here today to talk about a few things that Eddie and I have talked about in the past. Eddie mentioned that we had some time together in Simi Valley, and we had some time together through the Sella Leadership Program at Bend the Arc. And Eddie is a member of this year's Jews of Color cohort for the Sella Leadership Program. And so we spent some time in January talking about these very issues about race and allyship and what we need right now as a Jewish community, as well as just as a country and as a nation, and what's ahead of us. And so I'm going to talk a little bit today about the intersection, what I see as an intersection of Mussar and allyship, and sort of the moment and the movement that we're in. And let me just be clear, I'm not a rabbi, I'm not a Mussar scholar, but I have found Mussar being to be very interesting to me in my own Jewish journey. And I think that there are tremendous connections and parallels between it and the moment that we're in right now. But I'm gonna start with a story, of course, because stories are great and they really are able to punctuate points for us. Last winter, I was participating in a panel at B'nai Jeshurun, which is a synagogue on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and it is a synagogue with a tremendous history of social justice and action and in community engagement. And it was a panel specifically on Jews of color and how not only how has the Jewish community always been diverse, but how the lack of that reflection of diversity in our institutions, in our shuls, and our JCCs has marginalized and otherized Jews of color over time. And we got to, there were the questions that you can imagine from white Jews. Well, I don't see Jews of color. Where are you? Like all of those questions happened, but then we got to the end, and a little 5-year-old Black girl asked a question that punctuated the evening's conversation and really pierced my heart like an arrow. She said, "Why is it that Black people always live in places that are dangerous?" And you could have heard, pardon my language, a rat piss on a cotton ball in that room. It was so quiet because in that question, everyone knew exactly what was reflected in it. And that reflection coming from a 5-year-old girl means that the perennial inequities that we have seen in the United States are visible to even a child. And everyone on the panel turned to me. It was like, I totally drew the short straw on that one. Everyone was like, where's Ginna? Okay, so, you know, I'm a communicator, communications consultant and strategist by training, but up to that point, I'd always focused on trying to persuade elected officials or voters to do the right thing. And now my skills were going to be put to the test by someone who might not be able to tie their own shoes. How was I supposed to explain systemic racism and perennial inequality to a kindergarten in less than a minute? And her very asking of the question, like I said, really underscored the deep impacts of racism that have been purposely built into the system of America. But and to be honest, in a lot of ways, I don't really remember my explicit and specific answer. My heart was beating so loudly in my ears at the time for me to even remember what I was saying. But we know the general answer, which is that Black people often live in places that are dangerous because we have always lived in places that are dangerous on these shores. We came here, and many of us came here in a dangerous place, and we got here to a dangerous place. And the systems that we have built have maintained that same danger around being Black and Black life in this country. So in this moment, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, which is not necessarily new, we all remember when Trayvon Martin was murdered by George Zimmerman. And Alicia Garza penned those words on Twitter. But we've reached a moment of reckoning outside of the Black community that has made so much progress and so much change and so much reflection possible just in these last few months since the murder of George Floyd. What I find interesting about this connection between Mussar and this notion of allyship in this particular moment is that they are both long-term investments, right? So Mussar is about setting your sights on improving your own well-being over time and with dedication. And allyship in a moment of not just a new civil rights movement, but an anti-racist movement also is a long-term investment that we make, or that we should be making as folks who want to see the United States and America become the country that we know it can be. So when I think about, and I think it's important also to sort of parse out allyship and co-conspiratorship or comradeship. To me, allyship is the floor. Allyship is being able to say, I support Black Lives Matter. I believe in LGBTQ equality. I believe in that our DACA friends are here to stay. Like, these are things that we can say. And the next step up from that is, what are the things that we do? What are the things, how are our actions changing? How is our behavior changing as a result of us saying these words? And when I think about Mussar, again, the parallel seems so clear to me. You know, there was a teacher teaching from a Mussar rabbi from a few hundred years ago who said that Mussar is about teaching the heart what the mind already understands. And so I think we're at this moment where we have like an intellectual reckoning and understanding. We're beginning to wake up to the challenges that we see and face in this country. And now it is a chance for us to move our behavior into that direction. And Mussar is part of that. We think about Judaism, many of us, I'm modern Orthodox. And so for me, there's certainly an orientation around Judaism around rules and around halakha and Jewish law, right? So like there's a lot of Judaism that is wrapped up in sort of a rules-based ethics. And then there is Mussar, which is more of a values-based ethics proposition, really. And so thinking about, there is Jewish law and halakha and do this or don't do this particular thing. But with Mussar, it's a more of a values-based ethics and behave in this manner, exude these values, incorporate these ideals in your action and in your work and in your deeds every day. So I want to share another teaching, which I think really reflects the depth of what we're up against and how what we're up against right now isn't new. Rabbi Toba Spitzer, a rabbi in Massachusetts, shared a teaching, I believe Rosh Hashanah a few years ago, from Deuteronomy. I'm going to quote this, so hang tight. If in the land you are coming to possess, there is found someone slain, lying in the field, and the identity of the slayer is not known, your elders and your officials shall come out and measure the distances from the corpse to the nearby towns. She goes on to say, that's actually a quote from Torah, but she goes on to say, this scenario describes a situation when a murder has occurred, but it is impossible to know who actually committed the crime. Without proper retribution, there is a blood guilt that cannot be absolved, which will endanger the entire society. In place of proper justice done to the actual perpetrators, the leaders of the nearest city must undertake a blood ritual. And that parsha goes on to explain what that ritual is like, and thereby removing the blood guilt. When a crime has occurred that involves the death of a human being, the land itself and those living in it become polluted. Even if the people directly responsible for the crime can't be found, that guilt must be dealt with. The pollution must be cleaned up, or all the inhabitants of the land will suffer. She goes on to say, until we as Americans do proper tshuva for the double sins of slavery and the annihilation of Native Americans, we will continue to suffer profoundly as a society. The Torah says we have to come outside and look. We have to measure our own distance to the crime. We have to say, I might be accountable in some way for this atrocity. That's the reckoning that we're in as a nation and a country right now, is finally realizing, where is the blood guilt? How are we going to absolve for these crimes that were committed? And unfortunately, because of the system of inequality and racism that we have built upon that land that has the blood of enslaved Africans and Native Americans on it, we're going to have trouble moving forward. And so this moment in time where we have had this reckoning and this understanding that there are things that we need to do and ways that we must change. And how do we do that as not just individuals in terms of lifting up our own allyship? How are we acting in the day-to-day? How are we existing in solidarity with Black and Brown people? How are we amplifying and centering their voices? What has changed about our behavior as humans that will enable us to improve our behavior and action and systems as a nation and as a country? And I think it's really important to recognize, and I spend a lot of time interacting with white Jews. I mean, the Jewish community is multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-class, multi-gendered, all of these things, and we're still mostly white. And so that is important. That's like an important realization and reality. I think even as we begin, or even as we get better at reflecting our true diversity, we are still in this country largely white. And it's not anyone's fault that racism and white supremacy show up relentlessly in our everyday lives and in our everyday actions and in our systems, because it's been hardwired into our DNA. And that's why Mussar is such an interesting and important gift, because that the orientation of Mussar, right? That by looking inward, we can improve not only our relationship to ourselves, but to God and to others over time, is so fit and so ripe for this moment. And Eddie, when we were talking about it back at Brandeis Bardeen back in January, it felt like, and I'm curious, I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute and ask you, it felt as if there was an interest and also like a resistance to like the actual sort of regimented study, right? Because like to go through what Mussar is, right? There's like, midot, these values that we are to focus on. And sometimes the values don't always feel right for this time and era. And I'm curious, Eddie, if you can just talk just a quick second about some of that conflict, because if I remember correctly, you were in some groups where sort of like, oh, this is a traditional midah, and where does that fit in this moment?
Right. Yeah. Like I remember in various groups that I was in, we were talking about the different midots, and folks really felt conflicted with some of them into the reality of the moment. And I think that it's very interesting that we had this specific teaching in the specific class right before really everything kind of hit us, right? Right before the pandemic was rampant, right before we unfortunately saw the murders of our Black folks being rapidly televised and put on a scope. And I think that truly was us trying to fix and trying to comprehend, where does our values and our morals correlate with the midots, and how are we going to implicate that in our lives? And some of that was definitely conflicting. Some of that was trying to take a step back and decompress our own self, right? Our own internal issues that we had to break down our own internalized biases that we had, where we were checking them with the midots and saying, well, does this really go with what I believe? Or am I trying to think that that's where I'm at and I'm not truly there?
Right. And I think what's interesting about thinking about Mussar as a practice, which I engaged in many years ago and over time have dabbled back and forth and in my own practice, but thinking about what, in a modern sense, what Mussar often takes, the role that it often takes in people's lives, right, is a daily practice of focusing on, in the morning, having some like a grounding saying or a chant that you have that is centered on a selected midah of a number of midot that one could choose to work on, and then mindfully acting around that midah over the course of the day, really putting it front and center in how you are doing your work, doing your relationships, doing your parenting, living your life. And then in the evening, reflecting on how that went, really recording and thinking about the degree to which you were able to really focus and activate and really lean into that midah for the day. And I feel like the allyship and the movement that we are asking people to do right now as individuals, as a Jewish community, is so parallel to that, because it really is, Ibram Kendi says the opposite of racist isn't not racist, right? It's anti-racist. And that is hard work. It's daily work, just like a daily practice of Mussar would be. So I feel like there's so many lessons that we can really take and learn from focusing on teaching the heart what the mind already knows to do. I want to talk a little bit about, so when we think about the long-term investment that we need to take as individuals and as a community to really right our wrongs and move forward in a way that is not only, and I talk about the Jewish community needing to step up and do right in sort of two buckets. One of these buckets is internally in our Jewish community. What are our institutions, our shuls, our JCCs, our federations, what are they doing to both reflect and center Jews of color and our experiences in our programming and our funding and where the money goes and who gets supported. So there's an internal work that we need to do. And then there's also external work that the Jewish community needs to do, led by groups like Oilot Tzedek and Arizona Jews for Justice and Ben the Ark and the groups in the Social Justice Roundtable. What are these organizations and these leaders doing with other communities, and recognizing that those other communities include Jews too, right? When we talk about investing in and following the leadership of Black Jews and brown Jews, or Black people and brown people and people of color, those people are Jews too. So thinking about our work in those two buckets as an internal community, lifting up and strengthening within our own institutions and our own individual towns and cities, and then also what is the work outside of the Jewish community? Who are we partnering with? Whose leadership are we following? Who else are we investing in this particular moment in time? Can we move the needle on progress by flipping the script on what we think is right and what we think we know? And so I charge my fellow Jews to think about that. You know, Gamal Palmer, who is on staff at the LA Federation, biracial, Black, gay, Jew, good friend of mine, he says, where is diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice in your budget? Where's the line item? Because if there isn't a line item, can you really say you're doing it? Well, there we go with the difference between an ally and a co-conspirator, or an ally and a comrade, right? Saying you support it is the floor. But what's the next step of following the money and making sure that the money and our resources and our attention really go to people and places and orgs who are able to really dismantle these systems of oppression within the Jewish community and without. And I think it's really important to recognize exactly, even in this moment of rising and dangerous anti-Semitism, which we cannot deny, is absolutely clear and present danger and a threat to all Jews. This moment also of rising resonance of Black Lives Matter puts particularly Black Jews in a difficult situation. And I think that is important for us as a community to recognize and reckon with. And so when we're having conversations about Black Lives Matter and about Black people, please, how about have some Black Jews speaking to that issue? Have some Black Jews who are talking about what it's like in this moment and what we need in our allies and in our co-conspirators. Which brings me to this point in reiterating, going back to the notion of we as an American Jewish community, despite our diversity that we know exists, we are still largely white. And we are largely privileged. And we also know that there are plenty of white Jews who are not in the middle to upper classes. They're, as we said, the Jewish community is multi-class, multiracial, multi-ethnic, and there is still so much unprecedented privilege in the Jewish community that right now we can harness and really put to good, doing things both inside and outside. And so this means, I think about this notion, like I said, I run in modern Orthodox circles, as it were, and there are plenty of rabbis in my sphere who feel as if we can't get political right now, who don't want to get political. I know Real Tzedek rabbis are not, and many of them are not in that vein, but there are many others who are. And so I think that this is also a moment for us to think about whether or not we are being concerned with politics or survival. And stepping back and thinking, this moment, the side that you're on is not about politics. It's not about a party. It's actually about progress and humanity and what comes next for the Jewish community and for the American people. There's one final teaching that I want to share that just for me has been really, really resonant particularly over these last few years as we have seen immigration and just disastrous immigration policy over the last few years really come to tear apart Black and brown families. And I think it's important to point out that while many of us have an image in our minds of immigration policy and a disastrous immigration policy affecting many of our brothers and sisters from the South, I think it's about 40% of folks who are caught up in the ICE web right now are actually of Haitian descent. So, the story of who we are, who we can become is not just the only story that I think is being told. And there's a Midrash from that I wanted to share with folks before we go into a little bit of Q&A, if that's okay, Eddie, and then we'll hop to that and opening up the floor to some questions. God gathered the dust of the first human from the four corners of the world: red, black, white, and green. Red is the blood, black is the innards, and green for the body. Why from the four corners of the earth? So that if one person comes from the east to the west and arrives at the end of his life and nears departing this world, it will not be said to him, "This land is not the dust of your body, it's of mine. Go back to where you were created." Rather, every place that a person walks, from there she was created, and from there she will return.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you so much, Ginna. So we have a couple of questions that are popping up both on our social media and on here. With the current rise of anti-Semitism that we have seen that white supremacy has been very vocal of almost pointing out whenever there is anti-Semitism coming at us from the Black community as a form of portraying the Black community as these racist folks, which is a fallacy, right? As anti-Semitic folks. But what gets caught in the trample and in the stampede are often Jews of color, and in this case, Black Jews. How can the Jewish, primarily white community, who upholds the values of justice and morals and Jewish values, how can we better be there in allyship for those Black Jews who are in the middle and are getting trampled and are almost getting in erased in existence, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you read the Facebook pages and or the Twitter feeds and or social media of any Black Jews who are in any position to have a public voice in this moment, and they're under attack and they're under threat. And it's an incredibly dangerous and precarious situation for those of us who, hold these identities and also hold these roles and opportunities. And so I go back to lifting up our voices and being able to say, because just as a case in point, right? Remember a few weeks ago, and there was the whole uproar about Nick Cannon and Deshaun Jackson, and like in the space of 10 days, we had a Black man, purportedly spouting anti-Semitic rants and tropes every other day for like a week and a half. Everyone saw their faces and their names, but how many Black Jews' names and faces did we see in those days being public and being asked, what is this like? We saw various webinars and seminars and sessions, but where were the Black Jews in those conversations? And so I think there is, there's a point at which when Nick Cannon was being reached out to by Rabbi A and Rabbi B, Rabbi A and Rabbi B could have done a wonderful job. And I'm going to call some people out here. And they could have said, listen, I know a Black rabbi, maybe you should talk to him. I know a few. There is a chance for white Jews who are in positions of influence and power to lift up the voices of Black Jews who may not have those same connections, those same inroads, those same platforms, and being able to share our story and being able to connect our own history and our own lived experience with what we're seeing happening. I think that has been an issue and a piece of this summer that has been really, really hard for Black Jews, is to exist in both communities, in both spaces in this moment. And so the allyship that I would ask for from white Jews is to lift us up, is if you've got an opportunity to share a voice, lift up a new perspective, lift up a different perspective, lift up one that is actually connected to, then do it. There are plenty of us. I'll help you find us if you need. Really, I think it's important to have us at the center of these conversations. And to be honest, and I know that I'm talking to the Jewish community right now, but Black folks need to do the same thing too. I think that in the Black community, we haven't done a good enough job of telling the story of our own religious diversity within the Black community across the country. I'll never forget a few days ago, a Black friend of mine posted on Facebook. It was around the funeral of John Lewis. And she posted, it was a funny question. She said, are you really dead? Is a Black person really dead if they don't play this song at their funeral? And I was like, well, if they're Jewish, because I haven't been to a Jewish funeral where we sing songs, but I wasn't ready to get into that conversation on someone's Facebook page about how not all Black folks are Christian, right? And so there's work to be done in both communities, but I know I'm talking to the Jews right now, and that's what I would say is lift us up, bring us in, put us forward, if that's within your power.
Thank you. And jumping off of that and continuing this awesome dialogue that we're having. And I think this is very important to say when we talk about having tough conversations. It's these type of conversations that aren't necessarily happy, right? Like, we're not talking about our favorite foods. We're talking about deep stuff that is really terribly uncomfortable for some folks. Along the lines of that, Ginna, how do you best give advice for folks to address their own internalized biases? I remember being in my Cella group where we were able to talk about, and I remember very clearly, the question is, how anti-Black are you? And I remember everybody in my group was like, what? I'm not racist. And then like a first Black person started talking about their issues with colorism. And that really opened up my eyes to saying, well, yes, that we all have internalized biases that we have been taught through systems of oppression and white supremacy and misogyny that have been deep embedded into our engagement in our society here in the United States. What advice do you give to folks who want to be better allies and are ready for that next step, but have to address their own internalized biases first?
I think the first question is for anyone is, are you at the place where you actually are ready to address your internalized biases, right? Because there's a difference between wanting to, I think there's a difference between wanting to and recognizing that you need to and actually being ready to. So I think there's an internal assessment of, am I in the right space to move forward and to move into real reflection and real understanding. I think it's really important for white folks to do the work with white folks, by white folks, for like, I think there is a come get your people kind of moment here, which is looking to your fellow white Jews who are farther along on that path than you are, right? And looking to them for some guidance so as to not burden the Black Jews or the Jews of color in your space to be constant teachers. Because just the teaching of it, look, we end up having to do it every day at work, you know, when we go to the doctor's office, when we pick our kids up from school. And so the last place we want to do is, you know, having to be in teaching mode in our own communities, right? That's really a difficult position to be put in, and a challenging one, and a burdensome one for us. And so I think it's really important to recognize where you are on your journey, recognize what you need to do to get ready to really embrace becoming an anti-racist, and really looking to what is that going to mean for your everyday interactions, for the political work that you do, for the personal work that you do. And really, and then also leaning in and leaning on to your fellow white Jews who are also embarking on a similar journey in many places and spaces, and who may be farther along on that path than you may be. There are so many really incredible teachers and trainers and resources that are out there for people to begin to working on it on their own, to begin working on it in groups, to begin working on it in larger settings. And so I would invite people to do that research. It's out there. You actually don't have to ask me or Eddie or Chase or Shahana. It already exists, and you can do the research to see what's out there externally, and you can do the internal research on your own and figure out where is it that you need to grow, and where is it that you need to be as an individual to be able to move, not just from a place of personal advancement, but what does your own advancement and personal progress mean for how we move forward as a community, as a country.
Thank you. And I think I wanted to point out one of my favorite Rabbi Akiva talks about when he was asked, what is your most important Jewish value that you see? And he said, I believe it's consistency. Consistency, and I truly see that in our advocacy and in the way that we engage with our community. Are you consistently engaging with folks? Are you consistently bringing down the systems of oppression that are tearing down Black and brown families? Are you consistently building up a community that is opening and engaging to all folks, so that folks feel welcomed, and so that folks can engage in prayer and feel happy and feel welcome and at home? So here's my next question.
Hold on, I just want to underscore that consistency piece, because I think that when the United States just broke open after George Floyd was murdered, I think that in those immediate days and weeks after, I was wondering, speak from the I, is this sustainable? Will we be able to achieve consistency with this attention? And there's an element of, one of my friends and teachers, Susan Lubeck, I used to say to her, everything happens for a reason. And she would say to me, no, there are too many bad things that happen for me to think that there is a reason for them. And I believe that this moment that we're in of racial awakening paired with a pandemic actually means that we have a built-in opportunity to flex that muscle of consistency, of diligence, of a regimen, because the world as it used to be is not available to us anymore. And so we actually do have some time, and we do have the ability to think about what this looks like every single day. What does it look like in my individual interactions? And what does it look like in my community what does it look like in the country? Because it's all cumulative, right? It all adds up to our systems. Sorry, I just wanted to, I really appreciate that. I think it's a really important note in this particular context.
Most definitely. And just as like the consistency of us looking forward for Shabbat and bringing peace to our body, peace to our workplace, and bringing in that rest and that consistently having that hope for Shabbat. We must also have the same consistency in how we engage with our communities, and having it be of free will and not even think about it. When you think about your advocacy, to me, it's like when I think about my giving, almost if you were to think about it, giving tzedakah and giving 10% of a donation without even thinking about it, putting it into the box without even having to think, well, maybe this is not going to go to the right place. Well, what is this going to be used for this? Without even thinking about it, just giving it. And that's how I feel we should think about how to mobilize and how to really deconstruct systems of oppression without thinking about it from hundreds of different ways. From what I've seen in the progressive community, we have to deconstruct, well, maybe this is this and this is that. Really, we should only think about the fact that we're not okay with Black bodies being displayed on national television being murdered. That we're not okay with that, and that we can have differences of opinion politically, but when our morals don't line up, and this is why I loved your Mussar, our teachings, Ginna, because if my midots aren't lined up with what's going on, there is no discussion, there is no further yes, and there just isn't, because I can go further than that. So my next question of point of discussion before we break it out to Q&A, Ginna, is how do we bring in Black folks and Jews of color into the space without making folks feel tokenized, without making folks feel like, well, because this is happening right now, all of a sudden we care, and all of a sudden we're going to try to bring folks in, and there's a sense of tokenization that folks may feel, right? Like, am I here because you really want to hear me, or am I here because I'm the only Jew of color you know? So what are your recommendations for folks?
This is such an interesting question. And I, just like asking any other group of Jews, a question, you're going to get a gazillion different answers, right? And I think you would get many different answers from Black Jews and other Jews of color on this tokenizing question, because I think I look at it as, is tokenizing for the tokenizee or the tokenizer, right? So like if the one Black Jew or the one JOC you can find comes to speak and is comfortable sharing their story and wants to be a part of that conversation and wants to be in that instructive, eye-opening mode, have they been tokenized just by virtue of the fact that they were the only one that your synagogue could find? I actually don't know. If they want to, I think it's a live question as to like where the crux of tokenizing sits, really. I do think that as a Jewish community, we actually do have work to do to understand the Black Jewish experience and the Jews of color experience. That is 100% true. And going back to my initial story about being on the panel at B'nai Jeshurun in New York, so many of the questions from the largely white, largely over 65 crowd were trying to indict the truth-telling that Black Jews were bringing. Like, oh, well, it was just your synagogue, or are you sure that that was a racist moment? Why didn't you come back? That has to stop. That is where the tokenizing begins. For me, when someone is sharing their story and there is an interrogation and an indictment of what their lived experience has been. So I think there is a way to be respectful in terms of bringing in and lifting up the stories and lives of Black Jews and Jews of color in our community. And there's a way to do it that is not respectful. And there is a way to do it that can be tokenizing. And I think the key piece is when you are in relationship, the potential for tokenizing drops significantly. And so when we talk about who is in the room, who is in relationship, who is on the board, who is on the staff, who's on the committee, who's interacting, who's engaging, that level of interaction and community engagement and togetherness really mitigates this notion of tokenizing, because someone who's in a relationship is going to be far less likely to feel like they got called on just because they were the only one. They got called on because there's relationship.
Thank you, Ginna. So now, folks, we're moving on to our Q&A section of this. If you have a question, either please post it on the chat or go ahead and just unmute yourself and ask away. Feel free to ask a good question. This is where we can ask,
no bad questions.
Yeah, ask like uncomfortable questions that sometimes like we want to ask, but we're not sure. Feel free.
Hi, Ginna, thank you so much for your teaching. I heard you first earlier in the summer at Hartman, and it was great.
Thank you.
I'm a member of the Jewish Center in Princeton, and we've had programs over the years around race. We do a workshop now called Examining Racism. It's a two-part. Over 2 years, we've had a total of 40 people. I mean, it's really hard. And then at the beginning of the summer, after George Floyd was murdered, we were approached to do a program, and I was puzzled. I said, but we do a program. So, but we did another one, and we called it, Why Did George Floyd Have to Die for Us to Pay Attention? And from that, somebody said, can we do some Hevruta work around our own internal work? Because we talk about, we need to progress on this on 3 levels. We have to do the introspection, we have to do the interpersonal work, and we have to do the systemic work, and we got to do it all at the same time. So we've got about 18 people now in small groups. Nice. Using Debbie Irving's Waking Up White. Some of us have already been using Lila Saad's Me and White Supremacy. So, gotta give you some background on that. After our big program, the George Floyd program, I immediately got a response to a survey about, I am not progressive and I did not feel safe in this. And that gives you also, we're quite divided, and we're not unusual for a synagogue, but we are quite divided. So we have people who are willing to hear, and then we have other people who would say the kinds of things that you said you heard when you presented. And bridging that gap feels almost impossible. A few years ago, my friend Carol Gross is here, which is great. We were at the beginning of the Jewish Multiracial Network because we were both adopted transracially. And I was able to bring some people, some of the younger leaders from the JMN to our synagogue around 2013. And so they were able to present from a different perspective than our congregation is used to hearing. But I heard you say, when we need to turn to Jews of color to speak, and when we white people need to do our work and reach out to our fellow white Jews to do the work. Yeah. So I'm trying to understand how to distinguish, and also what would be really wonderful, and maybe it exists and I don't know about it, is like a speakers bureau for the Jews of color who are leaders, who are willing to do that kind of outreach. Yeah, it would be enormously helpful, because then I would not feel like it's exploitation. It would be more that people are being well compensated for their wisdom and so forth. So sorry, long-winded question.
And I would say, you know, you don't need a speakers bureau to compensate people well for their wisdom, right? Like I think but I hear your point, and I think what has happened, and I'll answer the last question first because it's easier, is that many of us who do this and who are speakers and trainers and teachers, like we all have sort of developed our own speakers bureau of people that we say, oh, you know, you should talk to these 5 people or these 4 people. I actually don't know if there is a wide scale compendium of those of us who do this work. And that's a really great idea, to have that be assembled. And I also, and the truth is that the Jews of color community and Black Jews, I mean, so many people have been doing such work over the last couple of decades to build us up and organize us. And we still have people telling the stories of not being comfortable in shul, right? So there's still so much work to be done in pockets, right? Like, you know, you've got Jews in Atlanta and you've got Jews in the Midwest, Milwaukee, Madison, and those folks know those. So I think your idea of having a collection of folks who can speak and who are willing to does kind of take a little bit of the burden and the fear, I think, for white Jews in terms of, you know, having this as a pursuit. I'm curious about the person who said they didn't feel comfortable. They didn't feel safe in that space. And I would actually like to know more about why, if you have an answer, if you know why they didn't feel safe. I'm assuming that the Princeton Jewish Center is mostly white. So they were already in a mostly white environment. And so I'm curious, it was ideas that were making them unsafe? Was it people? Like I actually want to unpack where they were coming from with that comment. If you know.
I don't know. I know kind of what the political attitudes are, and I know where she and I don't agree, but it was a survey, and it's a little awkward because I think I shouldn't have known who it was, but I got the responses and I did know who it was. So it's awkward for me to try to follow up, but if I can do that in a roundabout way, I'll try to find out.
But I think what's important there is people's fears are real. You know, whether or not I feel like it's a legitimate fear that someone doesn't feel safe in a community of their fellow white Jews, talking about how we need to stand up as a Jewish community, rise up as a Jewish community, be present as a Jewish community in this moment. It doesn't really matter whether or not I think they're bonkers for saying that. They actually do feel it and they do believe it. And I also believe in the importance of the right messenger and the right message to the right audience. And a person who says to you that in the midst of being with 50 other white Jews, they didn't feel safe, is someone that needs a little bit of extra time and a little bit of extra attention potentially. And not from me, it needs to be from someone who looks like you, who can really meet them where they are and understand that even if you feel, as I do, that fear might be somewhat unfounded, it's real for them. And being able to recognize that and having empathy and respect, even for the ideas that may be challenging and problematic, is actually the first step in changing someone's mind and bringing them along. So I would encourage you to, I mean, it's hard because it was a survey, supposedly anonymous, so it's a little bit different, but if that situation comes up, I would look at it in a real micro way and see who can be the best messenger with the best message, and who can come at that person with empathy and respect.
Thank you. We have time enough for one more question before we wrap up. So if you have a question, please ask it right now before we wrap up with today's programming. Remember, you can unmute yourself or post in the chat. And I'm looking at our social medias as well to see if anybody else is asking on here. Come on, folks.
This may definitely be the quietest crowd I've ever had, Eddie.
Yeah, definitely. I see that. I think we'll just go ahead and wrap up then. Ginna, I think that this is a discussion that just there barely scrapes what the work that needs to be done, and this is just but a little bit of what needs to happen. And I thank you so much for coming on by. Ginna is truly a tzedekah and such an amazing person to be able to follow, and I had the great honor to learn with you and be and as you call the friendship mentorship, where I was able to learn so much from you. And in going forth, I think that the way that we see the importance of what you taught us today, from what I recollected, is that we should use our Mussar as a set of value systems to check our own work and to check ourselves and where we are in dismantling racism. Because as you said, to be a true ally, it isn't just enough, just to the ground level, the bare minimum is to say, right, that I'm an ally. But that's the minimum. What's the next step of the work that needs to happen? What's the next step of what's going to be the change of our community? So for everybody who joined us today, thank you so much. Ginna, it's always a pleasure to have you on board. I hope that everybody follows up on our webinars. Next webinar is going to be in September. We will be having another one of our Sella alumni who's Ginna was able to teach, Jordan Daniels from Leech Tag. Will be joining us. So we appreciate you. Thank you so much for continuing this work that we know is tiring, we know is relentless. So to be able to have such a powerful speaker and such a powerful leader in the Jewish community is such a blessing. Thank you so much, Ginna. Thank you everybody for joining us. Take
Bye,
care.
everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.